The security camera caught everything in crystal clear 4K. Karen's face twisted with malicious satisfaction as she poured the cement into my prized garden, destroying years of work in minutes. But what she didn't know was that I'd been watching, waiting, planning. The trap was set perfectly, and she just walked straight into the biggest mistake of her life. Because that wasn't just any garden, she was destroying it, was evidence. And now, with one vindictive act, she'd just handed me everything I needed to Marcus. Chen had always prided himself on being a reasonable man. In his 23 years as a civil engineer, he'd built bridges that spanned impossible gaps, designed foundations that could weather any storm, and solved problems that lesser minds couldn't even comprehend. But standing in his backyard at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, staring at the destruction of his championship-winning Japanese maple grove, Marcus realized that some problems required a different kind of engineering entirely. The concrete had hardened overnight into gray, ugly scabs across the carefully manicured landscape. Each tree-some, over 15 years old, stood like cemetery monuments in their cement coffins. The koi pond, once a serene centerpiece where he'd meditated after long days, was now a concrete crater that looked like a bomb had gone off. $37,000, he whispered to himself, calculating the damage with the precision that had made him one of the most sought-after engineers in the Pacific Northwest. $37,000 and 15 years of my life. His phone buzzed. A text from his neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who lived on the other side of Karen Whitmore's property, saw the mess. "I'm so sorry, Marcus. We all know who did this." Marcus's jaw tightened. Everyone knew, but knowing and proving were two different things entirely, and Karen Whitmore was nothing if not careful about covering her tracks. The war between Marcus and Karen had started innocuously enough 3 years ago. A simple property line dispute that should have been resolved with a survey and a handshake. But Karen had a talent for escalation that bordered on the supernatural. What began as a disagreement about a fence became a neighborhood-wide conflict that had consumed both their lives. Karen was a retired real estate attorney with too much time, too much money, and a vindictive streak that could make a rattlesnake look charitable. She'd fought the fence issue for 8 months, costing Marcus $12,000 in legal fees before the survey proved he was right. But winning the battle had only made Karen more determined to win the war. The harassment had started small. Garden hoses moved to spray his windows, garbage cans positioned to block his driveway, anonymous complaints to the HOA about imaginary violations. But over the past 6 months, it had escalated dramatically. His mail went missing. His car was keyed. His prized roses were poisoned with bleach in the dead of night. And now the nuclear option. Marcus walked the perimeter of his property, his engineer's eye cataloging every detail. The perpetrator had been thorough and methodical. This wasn't random vandalism. This was calculated destruction, designed to cause maximum emotional and financial damage. The concrete had been poured with precision, covering every root system, every carefully planned sightline, every element of the garden that had taken him years to perfect. His phone rang. Detective Sarah Mills, the cop who'd been handling his previous complaints about Karen. "Marcus, I heard about your garden. I'm heading over now." "Don't bother Sarah. We both know how this goes. No witnesses, no evidence, no case. This is different. This is major property damage. We're talking felony territory now." Marcus almost laughed. "You think Karen's going to confess? She's been playing this game for 3 years. She's too smart to get caught." "Maybe, but people make mistakes when they get cocky. And from what I've seen, Karen's definitely getting cocky." After hanging up, Marcus stood in his ruined garden and made a decision that would have terrified his younger self. He was going to engineer a trap so elegant, so perfectly designed, that Karen would walk into it of her own accord. And when she did, he would have everything he needed to end this war once and for all. The idea came to him with the sudden clarity of a mathematical proof. Karen's weakness wasn't her vindictiveness, was her need to witness the results of her handiwork. She couldn't just destroy something and walk away. She had to see the damage, savor the victory, feed off the satisfaction of a job well done. Marcus spent the next 3 hours researching security systems, property law, and the specific statutes governing evidence collection in Washington state. By noon, he had a plan that would have impressed his engineering professors. By 2 p.m., he was at Home Depot buying supplies. The restoration would be expensive, prohibitively so for most people. But Marcus had been planning to remodel anyway, and insurance would cover most of the damage. The key was making Karen believe she'd won, that she'd finally broken him. He needed her to think he was defeated, vulnerable, and ripe for the killing blow. He started with the cameras, not the obvious ones that Karen would expect, but a network of hidden devices that would capture every angle of his property in 4K resolution. Trail cameras disguised as decorative rocks, security cameras hidden in fake sprinkler heads, motion sensors that would trigger recording from multiple angles simultaneously. The second phase was psychological. Marcus began leaving his curtains open, letting Karen see him sitting at his kitchen table with his head in his hands. He started his car and sat in the driveway for long minutes, as if he couldn't summon the energy to drive away. He ordered pizza 3 nights in a row and left the boxers. Visible in his garbage is the behavior of a man who'd given up on taking care of himself. The performance was Oscar-worthy, and Marcus knew Karen was watching. He could feel her eyes on him from her kitchen window, cataloging every sign of his apparent defeat. She was a predator, and predators were always watching for weakness. On Friday evening, Marcus made his move. He drove to the most expensive garden center in the city and loaded his truck with the most exotic, expensive plants they had. Rare orchids, imported bonsai trees, a small fortune in landscaping that would make any gardener weep with envy. He made sure to pay with his credit card, knowing Karen had ways of finding out about such things. He spent Saturday morning planting everything in his front yard, creating a display so beautiful and obviously expensive that it practically screamed Target to anyone passing by. The neighbors stopped to admire the work, and Marcus made sure to mention loudly how much each plant had cost, how irreplaceable they were, how they represented his attempt to start over after Karen's latest attack. By Saturday evening, the bait was set. All Marcus had to do was wait. He didn't have to wait long. At 2:17 a.m. on Sunday morning, the motion sensors detected movement in his front yard. Marcus rolled out of bed and crept to his surveillance station, a laptop connected to his camera network that he'd set up in his spare bedroom. Through the night vision cameras, he watched Karen Whitmore creep across his lawn carrying a large bag. She moved with the practiced stealth of someone who'd done this before, staying in the shadows, avoiding the obvious sight lines from his house. But Marcus had anticipated this. His cameras caught her from angles she never could have imagined. For the next 47 minutes, Marcus watched Karen systematically destroy his new garden. She used a combination of salt, bleach, and what appeared to be industrial-strength herbicide, carefully applying the chemicals to each plant with the precision of a surgeon. She wasn't just killing his plants, she was torturing them, ensuring they would die slowly and obviously. But the real prize came at the end. As Karen prepared to leave, she pulled out her phone and took pictures of her handiwork. Not just quick snapshots, but carefully composed shots that captured the full scope of the destruction. She even took a selfie with the dying plants in the background, her face twisted into a satisfied smile that would haunt Marcus's dreams. The cameras caught it all. Her face, her license plate, her methodical destruction of his property, and, most importantly, her obvious pleasure in the crime. It was more evidence than most prosecutors saw in a year. Marcus smiled in the darkness of his spare bedroom. The trap was working perfectly. But as he watched Karen drive away, he realized something that made his blood run cold. This wasn't random vandalism driven by a property dispute. The level of planning, the psychological precision, the sheer joy on her face, this was something much darker. Karen wasn't just a difficult neighbor. She was a predator who had found the perfect victim, and she was escalating toward something much worse than dead plants. The war between them wasn't ending, it was just beginning, and Marcus was about to discover that when you set a trap for a monster, you'd better make sure you're ready for what you catch. Marcus waited exactly 72 hours before making his next move. 3 days was the perfect amount of time to let Karen savor her victory while the evidence marinated in the legal system. Detective Mills had been ecstatic when Marcus presented her with the footage crystal-clear video of Karen's face as she systematically poisoned his garden, complete with timestamps and metadata that would hold up in any court. "This is a prosecutor's dream," Sarah had said, her eyes wide as she watched Karen's selfie session with the dying plants. Destruction of property, trespassing, criminal mischief, we've got her dead to rights. But Marcus had bigger plans than a simple arrest. He'd spent his career building things that lasted, and he intended to build Karen's downfall with the same precision. The first phase of his real trap began on Wednesday morning. Marcus hired Premier Landscaping, the most expensive, most visible company in the city, to install a Japanese meditation garden in his backyard. Not just any garden, but a showcase piece that would be featured in their portfolio. The kind of garden that costs more than most people's cars and took months to complete. The crew arrived at 7 a.m. sharp, just as Karen was getting her morning coffee. Marcus made sure to be outside, directing the workers with obvious excitement and pride. He wanted her to see the joy on his face, the careful planning, the expensive materials being unloaded from the trucks. Mr. Chen called out the foreman, loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear. "Where do you want us to set up the rare stones from Japan, the ones that cost $12,000? Marcus smiled. "Right by the property line, where everyone can see them. I want this garden to be perfect." Through his peripheral vision, Marcus could see Karen's face pressed against her kitchen window, her expression shifting from curiosity to something much darker. The bait was irresistible and expensive. Beautiful target positioned exactly where she'd done her previous damage. The installation took 3 days. 3 days of Karen watching workers carefully place each stone, each plant, each element of what would become the most photographed garden in the neighborhood. The local newspaper even sent a photographer on Friday, running a full-page feature about Marcus's stunning recovery from the previous vandalism. But the real genius of Marcus's plan wasn't the garden itself, it was what lay beneath it. While the landscapers worked above ground, Marcus had been busy below. Using his engineering expertise and some creative interpretation of building codes, he'd installed a network of pressure sensors throughout the garden. The system was designed to detect any unauthorized entry, mapping the exact location and weight of intruders. More importantly, it was connected to a series of hidden cameras that would automatically begin recording at the first sign of disturbance. The coup de grace was the concrete knot, the standard decorative concrete most people would use, but a special forensic mixture that Marcus had developed during his work on crime scene foundations. It contained microscopic tracers that would be impossible to remove from shoes, clothing, or tools. Anyone who disturbed the garden would carry the evidence with them for weeks. Karen took the bait faster than Marcus had dared hope. At 11:43 p.m. on Sunday night, exactly 1 week after her previous attack, the pressure sensors detected movement. Marcus was already awake, sitting in his surveillance room with a cup of coffee, watching the infrared displays light up like a Christmas tree. This time, Karen hadn't come alone. Marcus's blood ran cold as he watched 2 figures move through his garden. The second person was smaller, younger, and Marcus realized with growing horror that Karen had brought her teenage nephew. Tyler, the kid, was maybe 16, thin and nervous, clearly uncomfortable with whatever his aunt had convinced him to do. "This is wrong," Tyler's voice came through clearly on the audio feed. "This is seriously messed up, Aunt Karen. Shut up and keep working," Karen hissed, her voice carrying a viciousness that made Marcus's skin crawl. "This bastard thinks he's better than us. Time to teach him a lesson he'll never forget." Marcus watched in fascination and growing alarm as Karen directed Tyler to pour concrete directly into the koi pond. Not just any concrete, this was clearly premeditated, with bags of quick-setting cement mix and a portable mixer that Karen had obviously rented for the occasion. "Why are we destroying his fish?" Tyler asked, his voice shaking. "They didn't do anything to you?" "Because," Karen said, her face twisted with malicious glee, "this will hurt him more than anything else. He loves those stupid fish more than most people love their kids. When he sees them buried in concrete, it'll break something inside him that never heals." Marcus felt his hands clench into fists. The koi had been gifts from his late wife, selected during their honeymoon in Japan. Each fish had a name, a personality, a place in his heart that had helped him through the darkest days after her death. Karen wasn't just destroying his property, she was desecrating his memories. But the engineer in Marcus forced him to stay calm, to let the trap play out. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about justice, and justice required patience. For the next 2 hours, Marcus watched Karen transform his meditation garden into a concrete wasteland. She worked with the methodical precision of someone who'd clearly planned this for weeks, directing Tyler to pour concrete in patterns designed to cause maximum psychological damage. The rare stones from Japan were encased in cement. The carefully planned water features were filled with concrete. The entire garden became a gray, lifeless monument to vindictiveness. But the real horror came at the end. As Karen prepared to leave, she pulled out a spray paint can and began writing on the concrete. Not random graffiti, but carefully chosen. Words designed to inflict maximum emotional damage. Dead wife's garden in large. Black letters across the main concrete slab. Tyler stepped back, his face pale with shock. Aunt Karen? That's evil. His wife died of cancer. Everyone knows that. Good, Karen said, her smile visible even in the infrared footage. Maybe next time he'll think twice before messing. With me, Marcus's vision went red. The careful control he'd maintained for months cracked like a dam under pressure. This wasn't just property destruction, it was psychological warfare aimed at the most vulnerable parts of his soul. Karen had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and Marcus realized that his carefully planned legal trap might not be enough. The cameras captured everything. Karen's face as she spray-painted the cruel message. Tyler's obvious distress and reluctance. The methodical destruction of irreplaceable elements. The pure, undiluted malice in Karen's voice as she explained her reasoning to her nephew. But as Marcus watched Karen drive away, leaving Tyler to walk home alone through the dark streets, he realized something that changed everything. The boy hadn't wanted to be there. He'd been coerced, manipulated, probably threatened. Karen wasn't just a vindictive neighbor, she was a predator who used family members as tools in her personal wars. Marcus made 2 phone calls that night. The first was to Detective Mills, providing her with the new footage and a detailed timeline of events. The second was to his lawyer, asking about the legal protections available for minors who'd been coerced into criminal activity because Marcus had realized something crucial. Karen's greatest weakness wasn't her vindictiveness or her carelessness. It was her willingness to drag innocent people into her schemes. And that was going to be her downfall. The next morning, Marcus stood in his concrete-encased garden and smiled. The trap had worked perfectly, but not in the way he'd originally planned. Karen had given him something far more valuable than evidence of property. Destruction. She'd revealed the true depths of her depravity. And in doing so, she'd made a mistake that would destroy her completely. The war was about to become a rout. And Karen had just handed Marcus the weapon he needed to end it forever. At 8 a.m. sharp, Marcus called the one person who could turn Karen's moment of triumph into her ultimate defeat. Tyler's mother, Karen's sister, who had no idea what her son had been dragged into the night before. Jennifer, Marcus said when she answered, his voice carefully controlled. I think we need to talk about what your sister made Tyler do last night. The silence on the other end of the line told Marcus everything he needed to know. The option was about to be deployed, and this time Karen wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. Jennifer Morrison had always known her sister was difficult, but she'd never imagined Karen capable of true evil. Standing in Marcus Chin's surveillance room at 9:30 a.m., watching footage of her 16-year-old son being manipulated into destroying a memorial garden, Jennifer felt something break inside her chest. She told Tyler it was just a prank, Jennifer whispered, her voice barely audible over the audio of Karen's cruel laughter. She said you were a bad neighbor who deserved to be taught a lesson. Marcus paused the video at the moment Karen spray-painted. The reference to his dead wife. Does this look like a prank to you? Jennifer's face went white. She'd been married to Marcus's wife's oncologist, had watched Sarah Chen fight cancer with dignity and grace for 2 years before losing the battle. The idea that Karen would desecrate that memory, use it as a weapon, was beyond comprehension. I need to see the rest, Jennifer said, her voice hardening. All of it. Marcus had edited the footage into a devastating timeline, 2 hours, of Karen's systematic destruction, punctuated by her increasingly vicious commentary and Tyler's obvious distress. The boy had tried to stop her multiple times, only to be threatened with being cut off from family support if he didn't comply. She's been using him for months, Marcus explained, showing Jennifer earlier footage of Tyler reluctantly moving garbage cans and stealing mail under Karen's direction. Your son didn't want to do any of this. She coerced him. Jennifer's hands shook as she pulled out her phone. Tyler's at school. I'm calling him right now. The conversation was brief but devastating. Tyler broke down completely, sobbing as he confessed 2 months of being manipulated by his aunt. Karen had convinced him that Marcus was trying to steal their family's property, that he was a dangerous man who needed to be stopped. When Tyler had refused to participate in the more serious crimes, Karen had threatened to tell his mother about his involvement in the earlier pranks, claiming it would ruin his college chances. She said if I didn't help her with the garden, she'd make sure I got blamed for everything, Tyler choked out through tears. I didn't know what else to do. Jennifer hung up and turned to Marcus with fire in her eyes. What do you need me to do? Nothing, Marcus said quietly. You've already done everything I needed. At 11:47 a.m., Detective Mills arrived with 3 other officers and a warrant for Karen's arrest. The charges were extensive: destruction of property, criminal mischief, trespassing, harassment, and most damaging of all contributing to the delinquency of a minor. The video evidence was so overwhelming that the prosecutor had already indicated they'd be seeking the maximum sentence. Marcus watched from his front window as Karen was led away in handcuffs, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. She'd been preparing for her morning coffee when the police arrived, still in her bathrobe, completely unprepared for the reckoning that had finally come. But Marcus knew the real punishment was just beginning. The story broke in the local newspaper that afternoon, local woman arrested for manipulating teenager in vandalism scheme. The article included carefully selected quotes from the police report, painting Karen as a vindictive neighbor who had crossed every moral line in her quest for petty revenge. By evening, the story had spread across social media. Someone had leaked portions of the surveillance footage, and Karen's face twisted with malicious joy as she destroyed the memorial garden became a viral symbol of neighborhood evil. The hashtag #KarenConcrete began trending locally, with neighbors sharing their own stories of Karen's harassment and manipulation. Marcus's phone rang constantly. Local news stations wanted interviews. The Homeowners Association wanted to discuss immediate action against Karen. The landscape company wanted to feature the story in their marketing materials as an example of why security systems were essential. But the call that mattered most came at 8 p.m. Marcus, this is Robert Whitmore, Karen's ex. Marcus had heard about Robert. The divorce had been spectacular, with Karen losing most of her assets due to what the court had termed vindictive behavior during the proceedings. He'd moved to Oregon and rarely spoke to his former wife, but apparently, viral infamy had a way of reaching even the most distant relatives. I saw the news, Robert continued. I need you to know this isn't the first time. Karen destroyed my mother's garden when we were getting divorced. Rose bushes that had been in my family for 3 generations. She poured bleach on them because she knew how much they meant to me. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Did you report it? I tried, but she was smarter then, more careful. No cameras, no witnesses. She made it look like a landscaping accident. Robert's voice carried years of suppressed anger. She's been doing this for years, Marcus. You're just the first person who was smart enough to catch her. The conversation lasted 2 hours. Robert had kept meticulous records of Karen's behavior during their marriage and divorce, a pattern of escalating psychological warfare that painted a picture of someone far more dangerous than a simple, difficult neighbor. The memorial garden wasn't an escalation, it was Karen's standard operating procedure. There's something else, Robert said as the conversation wound down. Karen's been evicted from 2 previous neighborhoods. Always the same pattern: starts with property disputes, escalates to harassment and vandalism, ends with her being forced out by legal action or social pressure. She's been perfecting this routine for years. Marcus hung up and sat in his ruined garden, pieces of a larger puzzle finally clicking into place. Karen wasn't just vindictive, she was a serial predator who used neighborhood conflicts as cover. For her psychological need to dominate and destroy, the property line dispute had been a pretext, a way to justify the campaign of harassment she'd been planning from the moment she moved in. But Karen had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated her target. The next morning brought news that Marcus hadn't expected. Karen had been denied bail. The prosecutor had argued that her pattern of escalating harassment, combined with her manipulation of a minor, made her a flight risk and a danger to the community. The judge had agreed. noting that the video evidence showed a level of premeditation and malice that suggests the defendant poses a genuine threat to public safety. Marcus's mailbox filled with letters from neighbors he'd never met, people sharing their own stories of Karen's harassment and expressing gratitude that someone had finally stood up to her. The Homeowners Association passed an emergency resolution banning Karen from all common areas, effective immediately, but the real victory came that afternoon when Jennifer Morrison knocked on his door with Tyler in tow. "I wanted Tyler to apologize personally," Jennifer said, her arm around her son's shoulders, "and I wanted to tell you that we're going to help you restore the garden. It's the least we can do." Tyler looked up at Marcus with red-rimmed eyes. "I'm sorry, Mr. Chen. I didn't want to hurt you. I was scared of what she'd do if I didn't listen." Marcus knelt down to Tyler's level. "You were being manipulated by someone who's very good at it. The important thing is that you tried to stop her when you realized how wrong it was. That took courage." "I want to help fix it," Tyler said. "I want to make it right." Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt in months. "I'd like that very much." As they stood together, looking at the concrete wasteland that had once been his sanctuary, Marcus realized that Karen's greatest act of destruction had accidentally created something beautiful. She'd brought the neighborhood together, exposed her own predatory nature, and inadvertently proven that even the most carefully planned psychological warfare could backfire spectacularly. The trap had worked better than Marcus had ever imagined. Karen was in jail, facing serious charges that would likely result in prison time. Her reputation was destroyed. Her family had turned against her, and most importantly, her reign of terror was finally over. But as Marcus watched Tyler carefully chip away at the concrete covering his wife's memorial stones, he realized the story wasn't quite finished. There was still one more move to make, one final piece of the puzzle that would ensure Karen could never hurt anyone again. The trap had caught its target, but Marcus was about to spring the mechanism that would make sure she stayed caught forever.